Guys, it's the end of the month. That means it's time for my August reading and puzzle wrap up. Let's get into it. I did start the month with a carryover from July, and that is a nonfiction pick. It is Careless People, a cautionary tale of power, greed, and lost idealism by Sarah Wynne Williams. This is a book exposing Facebook. Facebook started out with the mission to connect the world. As a lot of companies do, they wanted to grow, and grow. They wanted to get more users to the website. To do that, can you do that in a moral way? When Mark Zuckerberg first created the website, he wanted it to be a politically neutral website. But obviously, as we see in our day and age, politics, they warp a lot of things. To get benefits for Facebook, mainly in the tax dollars, that kind of thing, Facebook began to make lucrative deals with countries like Brazil and China. That really ultimately led to a lot of politicians seeing Facebook as a tool, even though that wasn't Facebook's intended purpose. This leads to an algorithm that worked perfectly for Donald Trump's campaign and to have him elected president in 2016. Mark Zuckerberg was really in denial about that because he wanted it to be a neutral platform. But because of the way the algorithm was created and all these deals that Facebook were making, Trump was able to win the election. As I spoke about politicians seeing it as a tool, this made politicians realize we can use this. This is how we can gain power. Therefore, Facebook has power over the politicians because they're able to give power to politicians. And that's ultimately what has led Facebook to what it is today. Power and money, which I think a lot of the world's problems do lead back to power and money. Those two words go hand in hand. The author, she worked in policy at Facebook, but never really saw her concerns and her department's concerns being addressed. Then there was Sheryl Sandberg, who was one of the leaders at Facebook, who she was like the dream boss woman. She preached about being a mother, being in business, being a CEO, but was very hypocritical about it when actual mothers at the company had, you know, I don't want to say issues of being a mother, but like when workers would put motherhood first, Cheryl wasn't always pleasant about that. As this book was really, 2016 was a boiling point for Facebook. This book was a tipping point for the author to let all of her grievances out there. A lot of this didn't change my beliefs because power and ego is exactly what I expect for a corporation like Facebook, for a CEO like Mark Zuckerberg. That is all totally what I expected. This book didn't surprise me in any way because I'm like, yeah, these mega corporations, that is exactly what I expect from them. I am glad that the author was able to put all this out there to get it off of her chest, but it didn't change my beliefs in any way like I think nonfiction should, or that it should have me questioning things, and it wasn't an eye-opening experience for me. I did love the writing style though, because it was to the point, very blunt, and I really appreciated that because I had been reading, and right now I'm reading some pretty dense books, but looking back at this one, I'm like, yes, it did exactly what it needed to. But I do think if I did this on audiobook, I might have enjoyed it just a little bit more. And I know a lot of people encourage you to read memoirs and read nonfiction on audiobooks, but I just kind of changed up how I do my audiobook thing. I just do it every other book, or not every other book, every like 2 books with my mood reads. And this one was a mood read, but it was available on Kindle Unlimited. Do I want to pay $10 or do I want to read it for free? I'm going to read it for free. But with the structure, I thought this started out going in chronological order from the author's childhood to present day. But some sections in the middle were very jumbled, and it feels like these were a bunch of sections of a book that were written and then were all just thrown together, that they weren't written in a set order. I was really confused of when things were taking place, how far apart certain events were taking place in the author's life, so there was some confusion for me. Even in the prose itself, I did enjoy. I think this is a good book and that it is an important book, especially in our day and age, because if you think about it, Facebook is like a country on itself. You have these leaders like Mark Zuckerberg, you have the workers and the users, and that's billions or millions of people who are on the site, that it is like its own little country. So I do think this is a very important read, but it wasn't an eye-opening experience for me. But I do believe the author got her point across, so it was a good book, and if any of it sounds intriguing to you, give it a go. Next, we went over to my Divergent reread. This was my first time reading the book since it was published, and the first time reading it in 13 years. With the characters, I am actually so shocked that Trish didn't fall into the Mary Sue category or fall into the chosen one category, because with Divergent, it's something that is incredibly rare, but it's, again, not a chosen one kind of thing. And I really appreciate that, because so much in these genres of like fantasy and sci-fi, this is a sci-fi dystopian, you see that. But it was refreshing to have something a little bit different. And with Tobias, if you see him on the outside and just look at him as he is, you would expect him just to be the brooding male, like, you know, like Jon Snow. Jon Snow's a very developed character, one of my favorite characters, but like that quiet guy in the all black. But there's so much more to him. These characters had the perfect chance to be surface level, but they weren't. This book could have so easily fallen on common tropes of the genre, but it didn't. And the side characters, there is a lot of them, but they all had their distinct personalities, and I was able to tell them apart. I didn't realize how romantically heavy this book series is, and that it really does read like a romance book. I think this book, sorry that the camera just got all moved around. It cut me off because my storage card was full. I was dumb and didn't clear it out before recording. With the romance in this book, I do think it definitely stands the test of time, and if it came out today, that it would still be popular. Like, I didn't expect it to be so romance heavy. And we are actually now seeing dystopian romance become, like, it's becoming a thing. We've had romantasy, and I do think dystopian romance is the next step. We will just have to see where that goes. I was a big fan of the atmosphere and setting. Reading that first paragraph, I am instantly put into a dystopian world. It was such an immersive read in that category. The writing style was very easy to read. It was consistent throughout the novel, very accessible. This is young adult, but I flew through this book series. I do think I did this one on my e-reader, but again, just so easy and digestible. A lot was pretty straightforward. A lot of this is about individuality and when an oppressive government can take that away from you as a form of control, putting you in labels, set factions as we see in this book, and it is all just a form of control and, once again, power. I think this is great for young readers, because we have Trish, who is a 16-year-old girl, and she's really confused about who she is and what she wants in life, and is just trying to find her place in society. This might be set in a dystopian world, but I think those are common things that teenagers are facing in our real world. I was really surprised with how this book was executed. This was all pretty much the training and initiation into Dauntless. I thought it would be a little bit more than that, but no, this was really just all that, because ultimately this book series doesn't take place through a big time span. I don't even think it's, I would say it's less than 2 years, maybe even a year. It's not a big time span. This was a fast read for me, and since I had read it 13 years ago, there was a lot that I'd forgotten about, so I was making theories throughout, and I had a fun time reading it, and I do think that brings great themes to the table for those young readers, but ultimately it didn't live up to the experience that I had back in middle school when I originally read the book. But overall, this was still a pretty good read, and I would recommend it. We have my favorite book of the month, and that is The Secret Life of Bees by Sue Monk Kidd. I absolutely loved this cast of characters. This is a coming-of-age story about Lily. Lily is a young girl, still has an innocence to her, and she has that innocence and has this big imagination, even though she's been dealt a pretty hard hand of cards in life. She's coming in of age in an incredibly difficult time, that being the 1960s and in rural South Carolina. We have Rosaline, who is the caregiver of Lily, and she is a black woman. Again, I'm reminding y'all we're in rural South Carolina in the 1960s. When Lily has these big, huge ideas, Rosaline brings her back down to earth. She has that realism to her, being like, hey, we need to have a plan. Certain things aren't going to work because of who we are and where we are, but she also brought a lot of comedic relief. I really loved Rosaline and just her very like dry sense of humor, and again, she did bring realism to the story. We have the Calendar sisters, the Boatwright sisters. They're so eccentric and I love them so much. Like, August has such a warm personality that I would love to have a hug from her. I love them so much. If you like practical magic, do you think you'll like this book? Because they were very reminiscent. And then Betty by Tiffany McDaniel, which is a lot darker of a book, that I think that book pairs well with this one. The tone was magical and whimsical, all while taking place in South Carolina in the Civil Rights era. There was still a harshness to this world, but we do see just this blossoming relationships and female friendship and just womanhood, even though it's in this very dark time and place. It's so authentic because I live in South Carolina. My grandmother was actually my age of when this book was taking place. And just from these stories that I've heard from her, this reads so authentic to what her life was like and things that she witnessed. Placing it into this book, like, it's so authentic. And I love that. It just reminded me of, like, I felt like I was being transported back to my grandmother's view. The writing style was confusing for me at first, jumping between past and present. It is very flowery and lush, and I know that isn't for everybody, but luckily I did do the audiobook for that, so I never felt bogged down in that way. Sumont Kid is a fantastic storyteller. Plot was lacking clarity for me because there doesn't feel like there's a lot happening on page, but you can tell that the author did have a lot of ideas. This is a story about womanhood, the divine feminine, which is something that I love and I'm very passionate about. You can see my necklace there. I love those themes. It's one of my favorite themes to read about. Again, I Who Have Never Known Men. That's a book that I do think takes these themes and does it better. It really just scratches the surface level of those themes of what it means to be a woman, female friendship, of the different stages of being a woman. The momentum was really quiet. This was a quiet book. We have a lot of the same things, just a lot of the same happening over and over. It's very mundane. It really did get annoying at times, but I had to remind myself that she is a little girl. She is a teenager. That's just how they are. I had Rosaline there to bring her to her senses, and I really appreciated Rosaline quite a bit. Some parts were a little too coincidental for me, but I do believe with the divine feminine, with the Holy Spirit, that it is something that does put us where we need to be. It introduces us to the people that we're supposed to meet. The divine feminine is one of the themes of this book, so I can see how that plays into the story, and it wasn't something that took away tremendously, but I do want to make note that some things were a little too coincidental for me. But overall, I did love this book, and yes, I would recommend it. I think I gave it a 3.75. It was the best book that I read here in August. I love the characters, I love the whimsy, but I do think the themes and the plot were really surface level, and it's very quiet and a lot of the same happening. Now we have Insurgent by Veronica Roth. This is the second book in the Divergent series. And what I thought was so great about the characters in the first book, this book took away. They were very angsty. Again, I get it that they're teenagers, but we had grown characters who were acting angsty as well. I'm looking at you, Tori, and I really love Tori. I watched the movie over the weekend and I loved her. She was one of my favorites. But in this installment, she's so angsty. I get that they're dauntless, but why are you acting like that? It was so frustrating to read about the characters. And then the romance, they were just constantly bickering and at such the wrong times. I'm like, are we seriously doing this right? The setting was greatly expanded upon in this book, and it was growing throughout the course of the book. I did really love that because I was constantly making theories of what could be going on in this universe. The writing wasn't bad, but it wasn't as thoughtful as the first book, so it was good. It got the job done. But the plot really did step up, even if our characters stepped down, because it's asking big questions of what makes us human. Are humans prone to violence? We have nature versus nurture, which we really see in the next book as well. These questions I just think are so great to be asking young people. And the build up, it was done so well. The last 10%, you can go watch my short form content that I did of my live reaction to the last 10% of the book. I was freaking out. I was on the edge of my seat. Oh, it was so good. The momentum, the build up, everything, pacing in this book, fantastic. Romantic bickering, that's where it fell in the logic for me, because I was questioning why some of these things were necessary to the plot and why they were happening, and they didn't add anything to the book overall. But the plot, the momentum, the pacing, I loved it. And I love the setting, how we saw it build up through this book. and getting us to that end of the series. This one, it was a good book. It was a 3.25, not my favorite in the series. Let's talk about my favorite, and that's Allegiant by Veronica Roth. This one took us back to the character work that we see in the first book in the series. They were just so perfect for this story to have these characters in the roles that they were in. Their actions and their beliefs and just who they are as characters and where their stories go really makes sense with who they are. I'm so curious to know that in the future what happens to these characters, where their stories end up going. I know there is another book in this universe coming out, but I don't really know anything about it. I haven't read anything about it, so I don't know if it's a prequel or it's a sequel. I don't know what's going on with that book, but I'm so curious to know what happens to these characters. The romance, we do have some love triangle stuff. I'm not a huge fan of that whatsoever. That's not for me, but I do want y'all to know there's a lot of jealousy in this. This is our first book in the series that is told at dual perspective. We have Trish and we have Tobias. Didn't like how similar their voices were, because I would go to a Tobias chapter and think I'm still in a Trish chapter, and I'm like, wait, this is Tobias talking. I don't think there is that much of a difference between the two, and that's why ultimately at the end of the day, I don't think their relationship would work out, but I'm not the writer, I'm not the creator. I think they are just very similar people. So similar that I couldn't tell the difference in their chapters. It took me a little while. This one with the setting is where we get all those questions answered, and love that. I love getting those answers and seeing in dystopian worlds how we got here, what's going on, why is all of this happening. We get all those answers in this one, and that is probably why this is my favorite book in the series. There was a lot of info dumping. I do think that made it immersive because our characters are getting all this info dumped on them, and one of the characters is like, I know this is a lot to take in, and I'm like, yeah, it's a lot to take in. And some of the science stuff did go over my head. Like, it's kind of shocking that I read this as like a freshman in high school. I don't know how I kept all that in there. I don't know. I don't know what that reading experience was like for me, if I even picked up on all that, but it was a lot. But this is the book where the writing is the worst, because I would be really confused on what a character was trying to say, because at times the writing was very emotional, and at other times it was just clunky, and I didn't really understand what the character was doing, what they were saying, what they were agreeing to. So it did lack clarity. The plot really surprised me. This is really a story of systematic oppression, and I couldn't help but compare it to real world situations, and this is introducing that to young readers. I definitely didn't pick that up when I was 14 or 15 years old reading this book, but I didn't really have an adult in my life who was reading this book with me. But I do think this is a great book to introduce to those young readers in your life, to introduce to your kids, because you can have these great discussions on systematic oppression and all this injustice that we can see in our world. I think this is a great introductory to that topic, and for the right age group for when they start to learn about that. As I said, I was 14 or 15 years old when I read this book, so I do think that is a great time to introduce these themes to people of that age range. At the end of the day, there were a lot of full circle moments, and I do believe this wrapped up very nicely, and I loved this book, and it is definitely my favorite book in the series, which might be a bit of an unpopular opinion. Next, we have my anthology that I would read in the morning, and that is New Poets of Native Nations, edited by Hyde E. Urich. I do think the editor got his point across quite well, because this is showing what it means to be an Indigenous person in our modern day and age. But there were some sections where the poetry didn't really vibe with me. I had a hard time understanding the language. Yes, it was English, but the way it was written, I had a really hard time understanding what the poets were trying to say. I also struggled with the spelling and just some artistic stuff. I do think this is a good collection. It's very eye-opening, and seeing how the history and statistics impact the modern day person. And I do think this book did a great job at getting its point across. We have my least favorite book in the Divergent universe, and that is 4 by Veronica Roth. This is a Divergent collection. It is a bind-up of stories that are told at 4's perspective. We see him 2 years before the series takes place, then when the series is taking place, and then we just have some short little snippets of scenes from the main series, but at 4's perspective. let's talk about it. In this book, I learned that Veronica Roth originally intended for the Divergent series to be about Floor, but then she realized she couldn't tell the story that she wanted to tell from his perspective. So that makes a lot of sense, because some of this was just so similar to Trish. When I learned in Allegiant, their voices are very hard to tell apart. This felt like I was reading the first book of Divergent all over again, just at Four's experience going through initiation and training and getting into Dauntless. So it was all just very similar. We did get some little insights of his thought process, so there was potential with his character, but it just felt like stuff that I've read before. The atmosphere still feels like Divergent. I love that even though Four is a very serious character, we get tones of youthfulness and nostalgia when the Dauntless are playing games like Dare. That was really fun, and I did like seeing this world when it's not at an all-out active war. I do think there's a bit of a Cold War that is going on. But I love that we got to see these characters let loose and have a little bit of fun and not always be in that serious mindset. Writing was a little bit repetitive. This was something that I noticed, I think, in Insurgent, that a lot of physical mannerisms are repeated. A lot of times it's like pinching the hem of a shirt. I know that's not the hem, but I'm not wearing a shirt. I'm in a jumpsuit. And that is just something that I noticed throughout multiple of the books. And it's not like, we all have one like coping mechanism or whatever that we do, like, you know, how I just did pushing my hair out my face, how we all have those little habits that we do. But when it's multiple characters doing the same one and it's pinching the hem of the shirt, that got a little bit repetitive for me. This was really quick to read. Y'all can see how short it is. I was easily reading over 100 pages a day, and I was like, oh my gosh, how did I do that? I don't know how I did that, but it was very fast and easy. The plot didn't add anything new to the series, and I honestly don't think this is necessary to read. And some of the stuff has me questioning that we see this knowledge that Four has. I don't think this transplants well with the rest of the book that we have in this rest of the books we have in the series. It really just brings a lack of balance, because now we're like, oh, he knew all this, why didn't this come up in the original series? Overall, I don't think you need to read this. I think if you're a mega fan of the series and if you're a completionist like I am, I understand, but it doesn't add anything new to the series. It doesn't bring anything new to the table. I want to say it's fan service, and Veronica Roth did start the series by writing about Four, so I think she has had these chapters or these sections around, was like, hey, let's publish it, and that's what ended up happening. But no, we have another book that is a maybe. I would recommend it, and that is Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule, Star Wars The High Republic. This is the first book in the High Republic series. We are introduced to a lot of characters, and I never felt connected to them because there were so many, and they were in and out of the story, in and out, where I couldn't connect with them. With the atmosphere, I did enjoy the atmosphere. There was a lot of potential there because we're seeing places that we see in the main Star Wars series, like in the movies, and we're seeing them at a different era and just can see how they've changed or how they might have stayed the same. So I did really like seeing those settings. With the writing, and this kind of falls on the pacing, the first 25% really good, but once we get into part 2 of the story, it gets really lengthy and wordy, and since I'm not really connected to the characters, I'm not really caring what is happening. And with the plot, a lot of what you read on the blurb happens in that first 25%. Then we have all of this, and I'm like, that's not what I signed up for here. Not what I signed up for. And this is the first book in a series, so I want to be getting introduced. I wanted a lot more world building because I felt like I was thrown right in with this cold opening. We are in space, so I get that it's cold. Sorry. But I felt like I was supposed to know all these terms and places and races or species of aliens where we needed world building. This is the first book in a series, and the author just expected us to know all of this stuff that I didn't actually know. There was potential here, but it needed more world building, and the writing needed to be more consistent. Characters needed to have more depth to them. I think they were just there for the sake of the plot. I have the last book that I read, and it is a good book that I would maybe recommend, and that is Lincoln by Gore Vidal. This is a character study on Abraham Lincoln, and I think the book did a great job at that, because we're seeing Abraham Lincoln as the man and as the president, because he is an American legend. I loved him. He's such a lovable person, like self-deprecating person, very humble person. Then we have Mary Todd. I loved Mary Todd. She was so relatable. She was a bit of a shopaholic, loved to spend money, and she got migraines, and honestly I can relate to all that, and she even kind of dealt with the occult at times. Yeah, been there. So I did really like Mary Todd. I liked the characters. The side characters were a bit confusing at first, but as the story progresses, you do get used to who they are and what their roles are. I did keep notes on that with my mood reads. I'm always taking notes as well, so I have that background knowledge that I might need. It's obvious who the author's favorite characters were, and I think that was the Chase family, but I like knowing, like, okay, this is who Gore Vidal's liking. And I did like Katie Chase. I did really like her, and I really want to Wikipedia her, but I'm waiting for the next book in the series because she could still be alive in that one. The atmosphere wasn't a big highlight for me, but it did do what historical fiction does, and that is taking a place that we know, Washington DC, and transporting us back 160 years. And I loved seeing street names that I'm familiar with or places that I've been. I did really like that, but it wasn't like the main highlight of the book for me. You know, his writing is very detailed. It makes it very dense, where I'm like, do we really need all of these details? But I do love the tone. It's very witty, comedic, clever. That was something with Lincoln himself. I thought he was very comedic, and he would have loved a dad joke. He would have. The plot, this really showed me how Abraham Lincoln was viewed in his own time versus how he's viewed in our time. He didn't win a popular vote. He was not popular. My dog just knocked down my light. But he was not a popular president. I mean, half the country hated him. There was a civil war. Now he's on our money. He's on Mount Rushmore. He has a huge monument. And I do think this book really solidified that for me, because the country fell apart under him, and it also came back together under him. That's what I got from this book. My dad was like, did it come back together under him? And I'm like, that's what the book made it seem, but maybe I misread. That's something that I really do need to... I always like to go on Wikipedia deep dives after I read these books, but I do have a nonfiction book on Mary Todd that I do want to read very soon. With the intrigue, it's like I kept waiting for something to happen. This is just a very long, repetitive book, because we're seeing Lincoln's whole presidency. We're going through this whole war with him. This is very long, a lot bigger in all sorts of devices than Burr was. I definitely prefer Burr than I did this one, because Burr is one that, yes, I would recommend. When this one's maybe it's not going to be for everybody, but I did learn a lot from this book, and I love when historical fiction can do that. And I know you can't always trust historical fiction. There was an author's note that, yes, please read the afterword of this book, because it explains creative choices and what was fact and all that. This one did have a lot more fact in it than Burr. But I love with historical fiction, you can get this fictional take, and that always encourages me to go read nonfiction or watch documentaries or just do research on what actually happened. And that's something that I do truly love about historical fiction. So I learned a lot from this book, and I loved the characters and the tone of this book. But it was very long and dense, and that's not going to be for everybody. I do have the puzzle that I completed this month. This is one that I've actually done before. I got it for free at a little free library, and it is this mud puppy one that is on tree-dwelling slowpokes. This one is so difficult because there's so many similar colors and fur patterns on the animals, with the sloth bear, the porcupine, and the tamandua. Don't know if that's how you say that. And even the panda at times, the giant panda, where their fur is just very similar. So it took me a little while to get through this, even though I've done this puzzle before. That's why I don't unhaul all my puzzles. Sometimes I do unhaul them, but the mud puppy ones I usually keep because they're my favorite. But that, even if I've done this before, it was hard. This was a hard puzzle. So if you think mud puppy's just cutesy and that it's probably going to be easy, no. It's not. But those are all of the books that I read this month. My favorite one was The Secret Life of Bees, and my least favorite one was 4. If you made it through this whole video, leave a beach emoji in the comments below, and as always, comment, rate, and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell to be notified when all my videos go live. I'll see you in my next one. Bye! If you guys watch my videos, you are familiar with Sherman. He was at a county shelter, but sadly passed away from having heartworms. So this is me to encourage you to adopt from your local shelter, but also to make sure that you treat your pets or fosters, whatever, treat them for heartworms, because it is just so awful and it's so rampant in these rural communities. So if you know any way to help, do so. Call your local shelter and see if there's any way that you can help dogs like Sherman.